Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Hanken School of Economics for the funding. And I'm really excited to talk with you and to show you a little bit of my work and my experience in Chile, especially in Chile. And well, I can say that this talk examines the relationship between carbon markets, ecological uncertainty, and native forest conservation with a focus on Chile. I will begin with some historical context, of course, about Chile, about Chilean forests, then move into our carbon flux data and all the uncertainties behind it. And finally, I'll discuss some broader implications for carbon and biodiversity markets. And to briefly introduce my background, my work has been situated at the intersection of climate science, ecosystems, and conservation. And my research experience includes mainly biodiversity responses to climate change. I did my PhD on that topic. I also do research on ecosystem monitoring and spatial conservation planning. So I'm basically a conservation scientist, not an economist. More recently, my work has focused on forest carbon accounting through Carbon Real, which is a sort of a startup company, a very tiny company, which has conservation projects in Chilean Patagonia. I can say that this trajectory, mixing words, has allowed me to work across both academic and applied carbon markets context, where uncertainty is approached very differently. And having set out the broader context, I would like to turn to the central question behind this word. Can economic valuation actually drive forest conservation? I know this is a hard question and it's not easy to respond, right, Maria? Yeah. Yeah, but the original idea behind this question was quite simple. If a forest sequesters CO2 and that service becomes in a carbon credit, maybe the landowner that has that land has a real incentive to conserve. That was the original idea. So in practice, of course, however, translating ecosystem processes into standardized carbon metrics turns out to be more complex than it first appears. Ecosystems are dynamic, market depends on stable and simplified quantifications, and my sense is that that tension between those words, between ecological complexity and market standardization, sits at the center of many debates around forest carbon. Right? And that is the tension that this talk explores. And to understand this context, this is Chile, these are Araucaria forest, a coniferous species, native from the forest of the southern cone in Chile and Argentina. This is Chile in South America. And well, Chile has its own history about land use and forest destruction, for native forest destruction. We need to look at briefly at how these forests have changed over time. Beginning in the 70s, Chilean policies strongly promoted the expansion of pine and eucalyptus plantations across central Chile and southern Chile, while native forests experimented substantial reduction and fragmentation. Later studies suggest that these land use changes not only affected the biodiversity, also failed to generate the carbon benefits originally expected. This matters because all the carbon markets topics did not emerge in isolation. They emerged within economic that had long value forests mainly for production and land use conversion. This map shows an example, a small example of that transformation. This is the Araucanía region in southern Chile. In an only few decades, large areas of native forests in the Araucanía region were replaced by exotic plantations. You can see the red polygons over there from the 1973 to 1999. What stands out is not only the spatial scale of the change, it is also the speed of this change. It happened in only a single generation. That is really fast. And this story helps explain why conservation remains economically difficult in many parts of Chile today. Despite this difficult story, Chilean legislation has evolved gradually, very gradually. Three landmarks are relevant for what follows. The 2008 Native Forest Law, that it was our first law to protecting native forests specifically, and this law was almost 20 years in the parliament, so it was a long conversation. The 2010 conservation easements, that is I don't know if you know the conservation easement figure, is like a private conservation figure. It's a sort of private legal mechanism that provides long-term protection where a landowner signs a contract where he made a promise to conserve the land. And at the same time, there is a land trust entity that had to supervise that conservation easement. So it's a new figure. I think this is a positive. It's a positive aspect for conservation. And the 2022 climate change law that prohibit monoculture incentives. And anyway, despite this legal evolution, important structural gaps remain. Before carbon accounting talk, sorry, I did something, say something in Spanish, and talk about carbon accounting and carbon market, I want to pause on conservation concept. Conservation is not what many people think, right? These cartoons slow a common misunderstanding. Many policies still treat conservation as separating nature from people, like these animals in a jar. But conservation, it's about keeping ecological process alive and working. And these processes support biodiversity, climate, water cycling, and of course, human well-being. Everything is connected, right? And this difference is important because everything for that follow in this talk consider conservation in this concept, in this way. So the definition behind the debate, internationally, conservation has a clear meaning. It comes from the Convention of Biological Diversity. And the idea was simple. It is about keeping species alive and in their natural environments and recover when needed, right? So Chile signed this agreement in 1994, and then also Chile joined the Kunming-Montreal framework in 2022, and there is the 30 by 30 target that wants to protect the 30% of land and ocean by the end of the decades. That is especially relevant for Chile. As we saw yesterday in the hotspot map, Chile is a biodiversity hotspot as well as California, South Africa, some California, Mediterranean environments in Australia, and so on. And we are a very special biodiversity hotspot. We have so many unique species. We have high diversity ranges from plants and animals. And of course, every hotspot has been threatened by human activities, right? So what we decide here, in the case of Chile, is not only local. It's not it has global importance too. It's not important for us because we are Chileans. We are talking about biodiversity hotspot, and there is a global priority. So why do we need conserve now? There is two converging global crises, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis. The first one is biodiversity crisis. IPBES shows that around 1 billion species are at risk of extinction. The main driver is land use change, as I show you in the Araucanía region. The second is climate crisis, and we are seeing a faster warming, right? We are losing the habitat of many species. We are experimenting temperature increase and precipitation, more erratic behaviors, right? And stronger impacts are stronger in vulnerable regions. The 2024 IPBES report is clear about this. These crises are connected, not separate. They need integrated solutions, and forest conservation sits at the intersection of both climate and biodiversity. Yeah, because they give us a lot of ecosystem services and serve as a refugio for the biodiversity, and because of many reasons. They provide us clean water, they do a climate regulation, and many things. And now I will talk a little bit something that is how conservation happens in Chile today. Conservation in Chile, it's built in two main pillars. Both are important, but both are under pressure. The first is the public protected area system, the SNASPE in Spanish. It's all the national park, reserve park, and everything that is public that use government fundings. And it covers about 21% of the country, which is a large area. We do have a lot of protected areas in Patagonia, for example. There is a huge national parks over there. We have a representativity imbalance in Chile. No, all our important ecosystems are represented in this system, but that is one aspect. The aspect that I'm very concerned, and everyone is concerned, is about the financial deficit that the public conservation has. For example, there is a lot of ranger deficit. These huge national parks has very limited park rangers. And as well, all these national parks doesn't have management plans, and that is mandatory after you create a protected area. And also they don't have enough funding. So some people call this a protected area paper park reality. There are you can see a national park in a map, but in practical, there is not enough financial source to manage it. And there is the other side of the slide, something that Mia talked a little bit about philanthropy in conservation and private conservation. I found this picture about all the philanthropists that works in Chile or did something in Chile. Oh, Sophia is not here. See this. So, for example, there is in Patagonia the Tompkins legacy of Douglas Tompkins, Rewilding Foundation. There is a lot of NGOs that work close with these donors. And the conservation easement is a figure of private conservation. I will focus in these conservation easement figures along this presentation. And of course, there is a structural weakness of the donors too. Conservation cannot depend only of the public financing because it's not enough. And and what happened with if NGO donor don't want to finance your protected area, you have to struggle with that, right? So in this context, it's important because the project I will show you next sit exactly at the intersection of these two pillars. So these leave three open questions that I think frame in the conversation that I have been saying. Who conserves the remaining high-value ecosystem? We heard yesterday about the remnant vegetation in the context of restoration, for example. The remnant vegetation is very important. Who conserve this type of vegetation that fall outside the SNASPE and donor priorities, with what financing and for how long? And what we do, and how do we make conservation effective on the ground, not just designing in paper? There are the questions that open the door to exploring market-based mechanism, including the one that I will present now. So within this context, we began asking whether carbon markets could help support native forest conservation. Carbon Real project emerged from that idea or maybe that dream. The project focused on four main ideas: to protect irreplaceable forests, such old-growth forests or remnant vegetation. Also rethink the additionality concepts, market undervalue intact forests and native forests. And we believe that conservation must count. And also we want to add scientific measurement in a more reliable way, particularly around uncertainty by using new technologies and making the data very verifiable, traceable, near real time. And finally, thinking in a sustainable financing scheme, including the local communities, education, and other NGOs and everything. Well, that is where the scientific part of this talk began. This was our methodology. I won't go into the full methodology details here, but I would like to briefly outline the scientific framework behind the project. Our methodology was published this year in Carbon Balance and Management and combined three main components. First, we use LiDAR from drones and satellites to estimate forest biomass and forest structure. Then we reconstruct historical CO2 dynamics using satellite data. And third, we directly measure carbon exchange, net ecosystem exchange in the forests using edicovariance towers. That is, I'm going to explain that later. And together, these three approaches combine remote sensing, modeling, and direct field measurements for carbon accounting in native forests. This is our study area. This is Patagonia, the ice and fjords. These are a super special zone in Patagonia. It has a long extension of old-growth temperate evergreen forest continuously without people living in the middle of the forest. And is a carbon hotspot as the Amazons. Is one of the most carbon-rich and biodiverse forest landscape in the southern hemispheres. The project includes 9 private properties covering nearly 9,000 hectares, all protected by the conservation easements. And this is the landscape we are trying to understand scientifically, ecologically, and financially. Before measuring carbon fluxes, we first needed reliable estimation about forest biomass and forest structure. We collaborated with the NASA JEDI mission, which is a space-borne LiDAR system designed to measure forest in larger scales. And our results suggested that biomass in remote old-growth forests may be underestimated in conventional inventories, particularly in areas that are difficult to access. That is another main topic about Patagonia. It's difficult to get there. We are not saying that the national inventory are wrong. We are saying that there is still gaps to take biometric data. So, well, this work was published on 2024 and became an important foundation for the analysis that followed. And this is the Eddy-covariance tower. It's very tall. This tower has sensors that measure the CO2 exchange between the forest and the atmosphere every 30 minutes, continuously and in real near time. It's just like a light camera. And after a full year of data of being measuring the net ecosystem exchange in the forest in Patagonia, we achieved the 92% of data availability that is unusually high for such remote environment with very extreme climate conditions. And then, now talking about carbon markets, what carbon markets assume, right? Stable annual fluxes, for example. Fluxes are stable year to year, uncertainty is limited, and forest processes can be translated into standardized annual carbon estimations. These assumptions are very understandable. Markets depend on predictability, right? But ecosystems are often more far dynamic and variable, right? Let me show what I mean. For example, after a full year of measurements, we estimated a net ecosystem exchange of -4 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. In other words, the forest is clearly functioning as a carbon sink. But even with direct measurements, the final estimation to get this number still depends on several methodological corrections, including turbulence filtering, gap filling, Serson processing, and these are processes that are not well, I mean, that uncertainty itself is quantifiable here, and the question is not whether current credit systems are designed to incorporate it. In many cases, they are not. They assume how the forest behavior is. So this is where the picture gets more complex. In the first, I don't have a, maybe, no, whatever. We are seeing this bar chart. The first bar is showing -4 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. And the second bar is showing a very higher number, right? Almost the 15 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. And that number, we get it after we did a satellite analysis from where we measure the historical net ecosystem exchange between 2013 and the 2020s. And the results are very different. So the same landscape are telling us a different story. If we put our sensor tower, the sensor tower says -4, and the historical data says a bigger number, right? So interannual variability is an ecological reality, not a technical problem to be engineered away. And I believe that in the carbon market context, this aspect as well create challenge, which typically depend on simplified annual estimation. As you can see, forests, if you want the number of how much carbon is the forest storage of how much CO2 is being removed from the atmosphere is not a simple estimation. This is an example when we fail. Before our sensor tower to measure the CO2 exchange, we used the data from another tower in Chile, in Patagonia, in Chiloé Island, where we had a very comparable type of forest. And we thought, oh, maybe we can use these numbers to calculate the same estimation in Patagonia, but this forest is very singular. They remove a lot of CO2 per year, and it wasn't comparable with our study area. So another fundamental problem, market need projections right before science has the evidence. And as a scientist, we face these challenges too. So, and when the numbers eventually come in, there is a gap. The slide shows the processing chain from a raw sensor to generate the information that is helpful for a carbon credit. That is a long way. That is a long human decision that we must take. How we apply quality filters, how we can do the gap filling, the storage and correction are decisions that we scientists we must take. So it is important to recognize it when translating ecosystem measurement into marketable credits. So there is the core tension of the talk. There is this slide summarizes what market needs and what science offers. It's very different sometimes. Market needs stable numbers, annual certainty, sample reportable figures, right? What science offers? Ranges and probabilities, seasonal and interannual variability, especially for carbon and CO2 patterns, and honest uncertainty bounds. The question is not whether uncertainty exists, it always does. The question is whether the credit systems acknowledge it. So this is a concept of carbon markets, the additionality concept. I will say the additionality problem for conservation. This is how the system rewards intervention and penalizes conservation. I know that, I believe that additionality was designed with good intentions to prevent fraud and to ensure credits represent real emissions and reductions, right? But the concept was originally developed for emission reduction projects, not necessarily for long-term forest conservation. When applied to intergrowth forests or remnant vegetation, an important challenge emerged. What is the counterfactual? How do you demonstrate that the forest will have loss without the project? The tension is largely, of course, structural, and it helps explain why some ecosystems with the highest conservation value can also be among the most difficult to certify. You can see what get rewards in the additionality problem, reforestation, not again the reforestation, but it gets rewards. You can show a delta, an increase of the activity of your project, right? You have measurable changes for the active restoration as well. Get rewards. What it get overlooks, conservation, preventing ongoing loss. Despite there is the RED Plus scheme. Oh my goodness. that avoid forest loss. But I'm going to talk a little bit about this case. This is not my critique. This is on the newspapers. It comes from an independent investigation by The Guardian, the site and source material based on peer-reviewed studies. The world leading carbon certifying, as Vera, was approving credits that in many cases show a little measurable climate benefit. Baseline projection were often substantially overstated, and this highlights, of course, how strongly carbon outcomes can depend on methodological assumption and counterfactual design. Right? This is the whole conventional MRV, measuring, reporting, verification, measure additionality. This is the RED Plus scheme or project from Vera, a methodology from Vera. And we identified these three types of conventional toolkit to estimate carbon stores. First, the biometric inventories. You go to the field, you measure the DBH, height, apply an allometric equation, and then you go back to the field every 5 years or 3 years. If you can go to the field, you do satellite analysis, that you can detect the change of the forest cover, and that is a proxy of carbon stored. And they do a static baseline. So no one of these three methodologies considered, for example, the respiration of the forest, or how much CO2 is removing year per year. Well, and biodiversity credits, the same problem. We talked with Amber yesterday about biodiversity problem. I won't talk about this methodology right now, but I can say I saw many of this issue over there. It's even more complex than measuring carbon. And to be transparent about how our thinking has evolved, we set out to credit conservation of intact old growth forests directly. As the structural limits of that approach become clearer, it was very difficult to fit in a crediting scheme with our initial idea. As the structural limits of that approach become clearer, particularly around additionality and counterfactual design, right? We developed this parallel methodology. Now it's in public consultation on the International Carbon Registry. And this newer approach focuses on ecosystem where intervention can actually be measured directly. We are not talking here about old growth forest. I share this not as a finished answer, but as an illustration that the field is adapting, is evolving, right? Even the question of how to credit intact forest remains open for us. At least we try it. And I would like to end not with conclusions, but with open questions, because many of the tensions I discussed today are still unresolved, scientifically, economically, and institutionally. For example, how much uncertainty is acceptable in a carbon credit? Who decides what counts as a biodiversity improvement? The increase of species richness, for example, the increase of forest cover. If we see an emblematic species on a trap camera, should restoration be treated differently from conservation treated differently from restoration? Who do funders influence what get measures? So carbon markets offers a promise. I still believe that. I hope so. Right, Maria? But that promise only holds if we are transparent about uncertainty. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that really interesting presentation. That's a big step. Thank you so much for that really interesting presentation. I would like to remind, and I see some claps. There were some claps online too. Oh, yeah. So I would like to remind our online participants that you are welcome to write questions in the chat, and I can either read the question on your behalf or I can open your microphone for you. We now have time for some questions and discussion. I also would like to invite Maria, if you want to contribute also in this question and answer time. Yeah, you come on down, lady. Here, come on down. And then I have made a teeny tiny executive decision change to the schedule. So I just want to get everybody on the same page. So we're going to give right now 15 minutes for question and answer discussion. And then we're going to take a very short facility break. Don't go too far, just that 10 minutes, because we really want to start our panel discussion on time at 11:30. And then we're also going to have a kind of hasty departure after the panel ends. I know that that's when the symposium ends, but some of us need to make a relatively hasty departure at 12:30. So we're going to take a little tiny break that was not originally planned. So everybody on board with me?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So who would like to get this ball rolling? I don't see any questions yet in the chat. So room.
They are thinking.
They're thinking, you blew them away. They're like, whew. Let's talk.
Just a comment about this measurement. I find that it's often like measurement is in the future.
Mhm.
We invest something now, but we're not able to measure it. And so you use all kinds of shorthands, like you take this industry to be same as this, or like that sometimes are very counterproductive because they don't actually show the thing they're supposed to show. So thank you for your contribution, because I've been working on these data gaps a lot in my mind, because I see how the investors talk about it, and it's so fascinating.
Thank you.
Bruno had a question, and then Ossi.
Yeah, thank you. It's really
I'm
interesting.
so sorry, Bikila. I'm so sorry. Bruno there, Bikila there. Bikila has a question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, I just want to say it is really interesting presentation. One of the issue I think that we also struggle in Ethiopia with is about old growth forest, where you have like high forest, high forest. And there are people who really kept that forest. So instead of deforestation, instead of really using the forest, they have been preserving these forests for generations. And then all of a sudden, this carbon credit issue came in, and they say, okay, this is the additionality of this forest is not visible. So we are not going to take into that. And that discussion is really, I think, in terms of technicality, is what we need to address, right? So I just want to ask you what you are doing in this regard. So it's quite challenging to have like, yeah, to say carbon sequestration, you need to have rapidly growing forests, right? So people who were deforesting, using the land for some other purposes, now all of a sudden they start to plant this. And the amount of carbon that accumulated on restoration sites is quite high compared to what you have in the old growth forest, right?
Yeah, but that hypothesis has been changed
Yeah.
now, because old growth forests they do still removing CO2 from the atmosphere.
Yeah, they do.
Tons, a lot of tons. So many people believe that, I know that the delta of the reforestation, you can measure it, like you plant the trees, they grow up, you have the biomass delta over there, but the old growth forests are still doing a very important ecosystem services. So this is the main idea of why we focus on that forest in Patagonia, for example.
So thanks for the presentation. And I was wondering, there are lots of different indigenous people have been living in Chile and are still are, well, Mapuche and all that. How do like what kind of relation these carbon projects have had with the indigenous? You told that there were no people living there in this
Region. About the
I think traditionally all the islands have been inhabited for thousands of years and all that.
Yes, Mapuches, communities, they do have a strong relationship with nature and forest, and they have ceremonial species. As the araucaria picture that I show you, that is very important for the Mapuches, and they live in Patagonia too, but not in all the sites. And they do have lands over there, but also there's private that has land in Patagonia that has old growth forest, and that is a concern.
But have they been involved somehow, indigenous groups?
In our scientific approach are not involved, but the original idea was if we can get information that allows carbon credit markets to conserve these forests, the financial result of that exchange can benefit to the communities as well, to education and everything. But at this point, we are only in the design of the scientific method of this approach.
I can add also here, so the Mapuche communities are much in the area that she showed the maps where the land use change has been the most drastic. A reason that it hasn't been so drastic in this region is there are no roads. It's very difficult to even get there. So it's like a little bit saved by the dramatic landscapes of this region.
Yeah.
There have been many presidents trying to build roads there, but they failed.
Sonia?
Although you were talking about the old growth forest and the restoration, and if I understood correctly, you said that when you restore the delta, it's like the change in the same activity.
And that is fine. Yeah.
But how about the carbon that is already stored in like, how does the carbon storage compare, and does that translate to the carbon markets at all? Like the long-term storage?
Yeah. We don't have the long-term storage. The long-term storage is answered in the baseline evaluation with the LiDAR, the historical estimation. You can estimate the above ground biomass and the biomass that is on the soil. And when the thing we are measuring is and calculating is how much tons of CO2 the forest is removing during a year. So it's every year data. So we contrast those baselines.
I also would like to add, with having done a lot of research in Chile, that the logics of understanding investment in land ownership, like if somebody holds a land there, it's quite remarkably different to Finland, and that expect return on somehow. And I think that is also where this comes in. It's in many places in the world. If you own land, how do you benefit from it? Chile is so neoliberal. It's the most neoliberal country in the world, that there is this tension all the time between finding short-time profits. We work with avocados with Soledad as well. You see this like short-time benefits, and then these carbon markets are kind of like offering a possibility to kind of compensate for just destroying, which is all Chilean economic practices since many years back have been completely destroying, no paying attention to the nature. So although we have conversations of these carbon markets that are they a good idea, I also see that in Chile that the situation it's very urgent to stop it somehow, whether it's through more of this kind of financialized systems or there's another, but it's so different to what we experience in Finland with our forests. And there might be very unexpected alliances coming up as well in Chile with Mapuche people and with the Mapuche communities and with environmentalists, because situation is severe.
And there is also several landowners, private landowners in Chilean Patagonia, for example, or in places we still have remnant forests, such as sclerophyll forests in central Chile, for example. So for them, the conservation is not an option because they don't get any benefits in many cases. So we started from that.
the question, because what I don't really understand is something is that you explained the private sector developing these schemes, the national park existing, but the national park are totally underfunded. They lack I think 1 out of 16 guards, and is not system at one point where it's blended, where in fact private sectors also finance the national park. You don't have this type of things.
Okay, blended.
Está como private and public.
Ah,
The private finances.
sorry.
public.
She's my translator. Yeah, no, it's not mixed at all. So the conservation figures in Chile are public and donors, philanthropy.
But they're
So-
not on the same spot, or are they in the same forest? No.
No, in the same different forest.
And Douglas Tompkins, I don't know how many of you know, he used to own Esprit. He was climbing the mountains in Chile and had a revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Sold Esprit and bought huge amounts of land, big news in Chile, because it was also cutting Chile too, and he was from the US.
Yeah.
So it was also a question of like sovereignty concerns. But he has been quite famous for lifting conservation as a private philanthropist, one could say.
Yeah.
And building, before that, the conservation wasn't even known almost in many parts of
He
Chile.
started the philanthropy activity in Chile, and there is now a Douglas Tompkins National Park in the public system because they
They donated it to the
land.
public. And he died in a canoe kayak accident a few years. So his wife is now.
Rewilding NGO.
Yes, it has been reframed as rewilding.
Mhm.
Conservation. And again, a little bit of restoration thinking in the rewilding there.
Final question, yes?
Thanks so much for such a great presentation and inspiring. I work with fires, so I'm wondering your experience if there's fires in your ecosystems and how do you treat it? In Miombo right now, there's a debate because you have fires, but then you have lots of regeneration.
Mhm.
So some claim for carbon neutral, even if we have fires, but some say no fires, it's emissions.
That's a good question. There is that.
I don't know if you have experience with fires. Just
Yeah, forest fires are not natural in Chile, in central Chile, as in California and other type of climates. And yes, if we have a fire, we have a problem. Yes. Yeah, if the landowner that signed the conservation easement has a fire, there is this is a low topic that I'm not an expert, but there is some agreement that he must sign and everything. Yeah.
And Chile has had huge forest fires, but it's been in the plantations. There were like thousands and thousands of hectares.
Yeah, and because the long forest drop, the mega sequía.
The droughts, yes.